Is that, you see, we haven't adjusted our mindset to understand the competition.
Briefly, what are some of the categories?
Some of the categories, we have about 14 categories, 11. I tell you what, it's a blessing for so many youths, but it's also one of the biggest challenges, especially for Ugandan youth to deal with. You see, within East Africa, among the 7 states in East Africa, our economies are on different levels. For example, the Kenyan economy is much more developed than the Ugandan economy, but you also have the Ugandan economy, which is fastest growing in the region, and you have like Burundi and Rwanda, which are still sort of like struggling to get there. So one of the challenges for us is, besides the opportunity, is that, you see, we haven't adjusted our mindset to understand the competition that's going to come out of open borders. That you have people from Kenya. Kenya has its own unemployment problems, but they do have a well-trained population in various fields, particularly in the hospitality industry. So with open borders means that if I'm a business owner and I want efficiency, I'm sorry, I'm not going to look at you just because you're Ugandan and I have to give you a job. I will need the person who's going to do the job best. So as a result, Ugandan youth have to understand that they have to up their game to compete. So this competition. So unfortunately, our youths are not yet, or they have not been oriented yet to the realities of open borders.
How do you think the youth can be helped to see the opportunities provided in this initiative, and also the opportunities around us? We border in quite a number of virgin markets, like in Southern Sudan and Eastern DR Congo. How do you think they can be helped to see them and take advantage of them?
There's one unfortunate thing that happens in our country. When young people assume big responsibilities, like for example, a young Ugandan becoming a chief executive of a corporation like a bank, or when a young person becomes a member of parliament, when a young person assumes a big position in the office of the president, they cease to be young people. They assume this sort of a status thing that, what perceive the older people do. They become big men. They become big men, and they forget their responsibility. They forget that actually they are part of a generation that's struggling to create opportunity and assert itself and have a common thinking. So that's a big problem. Now, when you're asking in terms of what private sector can do or the executive, I think we just need to have a national dialogue on this issue. You know what I mean? The issue of the youth. Because you see, the leaders who are supposed to set the pace are those young people who are in executive positions, 30-year-olds. We have 30-year-olds, 35-year-olds who are in big positions in government, but also in parliament and business. But the problem is, when they become these people, they become big men and big women. So therefore, they start looking at the youth as the other, instead of playing the lead and being the leader. So they are missing out on the aspect of leadership.
How do you look at Uganda's population vis-a-vis the rate at which jobs are created in this economy?
Every year, 390,000 young people getting into the job market. 390,000. We're talking about professionals coming out of universities looking for employment every year. But every year, the reality is that the economy can only absorb 130,000, for example. I mean, what happens to the other 260,000? And then you also have a rate of growth. Our economies, I think it's about 6.9% growth every year. Our population is growing at 3.3%. And so if you look at these statistics, it means that our economy has to grow like 3 times faster, so like 9.9%, to be able to absorb this sort of population growth in terms of creating economic opportunity.
There are those who have argued that government's focus on formal education and not so much on vocational training in a way works against its objective of creating job makers, not necessarily job seekers. What is your take on that?
Yes, I mean, I think it's a common debate that's been going on that government policy needs to be changed. And I think government also recognizes that. But you also remember, these systems are so bureaucratic. Changing a policy, it's something that takes years, and and so many processes, there's politics involved and all that. What we can do though, we don't have to wait for government to do that, you know. We don't have to, particularly where, I mean, you have entrepreneurs who have invested in high schools, you know. There's a whole high school flourishing schools around, you know, S1 to S6. So the people who are investing in these high schools, they can also invest in vocational training programs. You know, private sector institutions like the Chamber of Commerce, the Uganda Investment Authority, some of these which are robust, private sector foundation, which all these are well-funded agencies, you know, they should invest in these things. I mean, there's a policy on vocational training under the Ministry of Education, you know. I think it's enforcement, it's emphasis. And it's shocking, for example, that when you speak to people in the construction industry, they'll tell you how every time they have a big construction project, they have to import, you know, plumbers, and they have to bring in masons. We don't have enough of those. Can you imagine? I mean, we have to invest in these areas, so we don't have to wait for government to first set up these vocational training institutes.
How do initiatives, you know, like the Tetea Uganda initiative of Young Achievers Awards, help remedy some of these challenges?
I strongly believe initiatives like this, they are a solution, you know, what we call enterprise solutions. You create a platform for inspiration, because you see, the realities of our country, we need inspiration, you know, our youth need inspiration. And the inspiration I'm talking about is to look at those who have struggled to create these opportunities, you know what I mean, that it's actually possible. So therefore, the whole process of nominations and evaluations and getting to those examples that we want to showcase, it's not a question of who has made young people, who's making the most money. No, it's the person who is actually presenting the best example we can put forward, the great story that an everyday young person can relate to, and look at the different struggle steps that they go through, but they can also achieve it.